Okay, good morning again, everyone, and welcome to the first in our series of Brodie's sports-related webinars, and that's ahead of the Commonwealth Games taking place in Birmingham later this summer. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Elaine Farquharson Black. I'm a partner in the Aberdeen office. I'm in the planning team. And as I suspect, as a number of people probably already know, my legal career has been intertwined with an amateur and professional golf career, first as a player and then laterally as the captain of the Great Britain and Ireland ladies golf team, and then most recently captain of my home club, D-Side Golf Club. So I was delighted when I was asked to host a discussion about peak performance and the lessons that we can gain from playing elite sport and how we can transfer them into the work environment. It's an area that's really close to my heart. Most people that know me know that I've worked with sports psychologists and psychologists at work to try to be the best version of me, whether that's on the golf course or whether that's kind of in the boardroom. And so I'm really looking forward to today. I'm hoping to get lots of tips that I'm going to kind of take away and work on and hopefully kind of develop. And it's a fabulous panel that we've got here. We've got two Olympians, it's amazing, and one of the country's leading sports psychologists. And I'm delighted that you're going to be sharing your insights into things that we can do to create an environment in which we can all perform at our best. So first of all, welcome Susan Egelstaff. Susan is a former Scottish international ladies singles elite badminton player, winner of no less than 7 national championships and 7 international titles. Susan competed in 3 consecutive Commonwealth Games, medaling in Manchester in 2002, Melbourne in 2006, and you were a member of Team GB at the Olympics in 2012, where you became the first Scottish badminton player to win a match at an Olympic Games. And since retiring from competitive sports, Susan is a sports columnist and a writer and a regular guest contributor on both TV and radio. So welcome, Susan, and congratulations. And our second Olympian this morning is Lesley McKenna. Lesley made her Olympic debut at the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics in 2002, competing in the snowboard halfpipe. And following this, she competed at the Turin 2006 Games and the Vancouver 2010 Games. And Lesley, you've got a unique place in British snow sport as you're the first UK snowboarder ever to have won a World Cup halfpipe event. Fantastic, congratulations. And in 2003, you won 2 World Cup events and led the World Cup standing. So an amazing, amazing career. And you're now the program manager of GB Park and, I was about to say Park and Ride, that's a planning thing, Park and Pipe team at GB Snow Sport, you use your knowledge and your experience now to coach and to help other people. So again, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And our final guest, last but no least, we've got Dr. John Mathers now. John's been providing sports psychology services to individual athletes and to teams for over 25 years. John, you're the programme director for the MSc in Psychology of Sport at the University of Stirling. And I know you've got a particular focus on the delivery and integration of mental skills teaching and learning in elite sports. And indeed, both Susan and I have benefited from your skills and experience kind of over the years working in our different sports. So thank you, John, for joining us as well.
My pleasure, thank you.
And what I'd like us to do over the next kind of 45 minutes or so is to touch on some of the topics that you'll be very familiar with. So performing under pressure, getting the best out of yourself, being part of a team, because I know you do individual sport, but then you've all got to come together as a team, and that's got a different dynamic. Goal setting, measuring gains. But for those listening, if there's anything that you would like specifically to ask any members of the panel, please put your questions into the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of the screen. They'll come up. I'm going to try and monitor it. They'll be anonymous unless you specifically want me to mention your name, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. Kicking us off, Susan, I'm going to take you back to your badminton career. And what did you focus on? What were the key things that you did to ensure, that you were able to perform at your best, such as at the Commonwealth Games or the Olympic Games, when they only happen, every 4 years, and you've got to be on the money at that time? How did you prepare?
Well, yeah, it's quite a strange thing, leading up
to the Olympic Games, you know, like for 4 years like that. And in a lot of ways it's more than 4 years, you know, because you like, certainly for me, like I had wanted to get to the Olympic Games for like 20 years. So it is like, it's such a long kind of lead in phase. And I think for me, like the two kind of main things that I found like so important were, first of all, like being well prepared, like making sure my preparation was like basically perfect. And, you know, it can never be perfect, but my preparation was like everything that I wanted to be. And like when that comes to sport, that's like the physical side of it, the like technical and tactical side of it, and obviously the mental side of it as well. And, you know, it's just like so many things combined, and especially in sport, it's the tiny, tiny wee things that make a difference. And so that's why I felt like my preparation made such a difference to how I like approached an event, because I also went into events where I wasn't well prepared, and it put so much doubt in my head, and that's lethal, to be honest. You know, if you go into a big sporting event with doubt, like you're a goner really before it's even started. And so for me, the kind of big thing was like making sure I could go in feeling like I'd prepared like 100%. There was nothing more I could have done. And then probably the second thing that I found really important was having a plan when I go in. And, you know, what I found really hard was, you know, control the controllables is a bit of a cliche, but it's so important. And that's definitely a thing I found really hard, especially when I was younger, to not focus on things that I couldn't control. You know, like often I would be like worried about what other people were doing, or, you know, worried about like the conditions. And it took me like quite a few years to get my head around, like, it's pointless. It's just a waste of energy worrying about what somebody else is going to do, because I can't affect it. So much of my kind of like plan going in was, you know, often I would only try and focus on 2 or 3 things, because for me, if I focused on too many things, I wouldn't do any of them properly. So I would focus on a couple of things and try and really like put all my kind of energy into doing that. And, you know, whether it was a certain game plan or a certain tactic, and doing that properly. And then, you know, your brain can only think about one thing at once. So if you're thinking about that and you're doing something productive, you don't really have as much space to think about the negative stuff and, you know, think about the worry and the doubt and everything. So for me, that was the 2 main things. And to be honest, I try and do that now in like my normal life as well, like prepare well and have a plan, and then it hopefully stops kind of any of the negativity like seeping in. And definitely, like as I got older in sport, that definitely, I became better at doing that, and it definitely made a huge difference.
And then, so Lesley, so you've done all the preparation, you focused on the process, you know, the control, you're controlling your controllables. But what about the nerves? So you've trained for 4 years, and then it all comes down, you know, to that moment. How did you manage your nerves so that you could? I suppose it's a bit like that. You know, you should have butterflies, but as long as you get them all flying in formation, you know, what kind of things did you think about to ensure you could do that?
I think that's a really interesting question, because it sort of depended on what my expectations and goal was on the day. And I completely agree with Susan. You have to do the preparation and you have to be ready. But what happens if you're not ready and you've been injured and you're turning up to have to perform at your best, and you know that you're not at your best? So I think acceptance is a massive part of this sphere, if you like, to accept what you're going to be capable of on that day, and then to aim for the performance and not for the win. So it's about what could you do rather than what you'd like the outcome to be. And, you know, whether you call that task mastery versus ego goals, or, you know, there's lots of terms you can put on that. But I think the way I tried to approach it was, okay, what can I get out of the day? What if everything comes together? I'm not sure I'm a great example. Every Olympics I managed to crash, but to be fair, I had decided before, that was part of the plan. I was aiming to go slightly outside of my comfort zone each lead up to the Olympics. I'd had big challenges with injuries and things not going to plan. So I was turning up, having done lots of work, but in a not quite ready state, which I think is the case a lot of the time in high performance sport. And at that point, it's your tolerance to risk. So how are you consciously making the decision of how hard to push it, and what kind of sport are you in? Can you play it safe and still perform? Or are you really, this is a now time, it's now or never. it's boom or bust. And half pipe snowboarding is a bit more boom or bust. If it doesn't go to plan, you've fallen over and it's kind of done. Whereas in a longer game, if you like, you've got a bit more space for tactics. So I think acceptance is really important. And then when it doesn't go wrong, you take that as a learning experience. It's something that was almost in the plan, which is fine from the athlete and support team's perspective, but often very, very uncomfortable when you go to deal with the outside audience, because their expectations are tied to results and places and rankings. So there's a lot to reconcile sometimes when things don't quite go to plan. And that can make you more nervous to stick to your guns the next time and aim high.
Yeah, and we see that, isn't it? It's always about the medal table. You know, when you're getting the recap of the sport from that day, it's always where are we, you know, and how many medals, as you say. Whereas it actually can be much more about the personal goals and you know, always just seeing that kind of improvement in your own performance. Or, as you say, for me in golfing, it might have been, well, I'm going to try and, you know, keep my putts down below a certain amount, because that's something more. I can't, you know, control who wins, but you can control your kind of own performance. And I suppose, John, you know, would it be fair to say it's that ability to kind of cope under pressure and deliver your best when your best is needed? That's the key. Is that the key to succeeding at sport? Is that more than talent? Is it that kind of mental strength which separates the winners from the just the competitors?
I'm not sure that it'll separate the winners from the competitors, because I think all three of us in this call so far have talked about the importance of mental skills. But mental skills are just a part of the whole performance package. And you could have somebody with the most fantastic mental skill profile, but if they have a lack of skill base or fitness or tactical awareness or opportunity, then it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get the result. How I would tend to frame it is that when somebody has a great set of mental skills, they're more likely to produce the performance that their training and talent and technique makes them capable of. And if you do that, it does give you a better chance of the outcome that you're looking for, but not necessarily a guarantee. And I've worked throughout my entire career with people who have often won events, but maybe not been at their best. And I've also worked with athletes who have produced an absolutely fantastic performance, but haven't won. So there's a lot of complexity within it. And I've really enjoyed listening to both of the answers that were given by Susan and Lesley, because for me, they resonated in practical terms a lot what the theoretical text would tell us.
So not everybody obviously is going to be able to compete in the Commonwealth Games or Olympic Games or, you know, kind of World Cup, but we all want to be our best, you know, at work, and that might be different. It might be an interview, it might be you've got to deliver a presentation, you know, for me it might be in court. You know, John, what are some of the things, you know, those mental skills that we can do to create the right environment that would help us all perform, you know, at our best in those moments? What are some of the mental skills that we could transfer across?
Well, in sports psychology, you tend to work with people, and they have lots of different contexts in which they operate. And I don't profess to be an expert in any sport. The people that you work with tend to be the experts in their sport, and you just try to help them get the right mix that allow them to perform. But the point is, you're working with people and behaviour in a whole range of different settings. So some of the skills that might be talked about in sport are very transferable to the workplace environment. So if you had a court case to look forward to, or you had a particularly important interview or job that needed to be done very well, it would be quite normal to be nervous because it's important to you. So the first thing to do is to embrace that nervousness and to realise that it's one of life's great tapestry moments, that you're involved in something that's meaningful. And once you've recognised that, it's about creating the physical and mental state that will give the best version of yourself. That's something that you mentioned just in your introduction. So you would like to be able to do some physical exercises, perhaps, that controlled your physical state. But more importantly, you probably want to do some mental skill exercises that would create the best mental condition that you would be in to deliver. So you could employ mental skills like realistic goal setting, positive self-talk, and imagery. And these are three techniques that probably everyone in this audience has heard of, but I can promise you knowing about goal setting is quite different to using goal setting and using it correctly, because life's full of people who have set the wrong goals, that have created the wrong environment and brought the wrong result.
So Susan, then, coming back to you and being in the job, it's not necessarily all about winning or losing. Again, if it might be in court, but again, I can't control that outcome. That's a decision that's kind of somebody else is taking. How and you mentioned that you kind of use your techniques now in the kind of work environment. What are some of those kind of techniques that, perhaps about staying in the moment or working through the process that you try to do that helped you, kind of on the court, and now you're using in the in the work environment?
Well, it's funny you say that about winning and losing, and sport is obviously all about winning and losing. But basically, like my whole career, I was so focused on winning and losing, and I was getting it battered into me. Do not worry about winning and losing. Like that was like so much of my problem, that I was focused too much on winning and losing. And so even though that is like very much a kind of sporting thing about winning and losing, actually the same as like almost anything, that's not the kind of ultimate outcome, is what you shouldn't or should try not to focus on. So actually there's a lot of stuff, when I was playing badminton, that like directly transfers into my normal life. So even like now, like when I was training, I would always, at the start of a week, write a list of, a few things I wanted to work on that week, what I was going to do. And like a lot of the time it was like really basic things, like really simple things. But, if you don't get the kind of simple, like fundamental things right, then you're never going to get the tricky things right. So I would write a list of a few things I was going to work on that week and how I was going to do it. And then, at the end of the week, I would look back and tick off. And sometimes I'd done it really well and worked on them all. And sometimes I'd been rubbish and not worked on them all and not improved. So I try and do that like now, like every Monday morning, I write a list of things I want to do, like, like certain like bits of work I have to get done, like even just like life admin, like all that stuff. Like I try and write a list, and like I try and be so organized, because certainly in sport you can't waste time. You can't go through a week and just kind of potter through training sessions and then get to the end of the week and be like, oh, what have I got out of that? Oh, not a lot. Because like players in China or players in Malaysia are not wasting a week, and even though you can't see them directly right in front of you, like I found it quite kind of valuable at having that thought in my head, that even though maybe the person in front of you, you're doing better than them, that doesn't mean you're doing the best you can do. So I would try and have like very like definite things, and like in my normal life now have very definite things that like I want to do that week. And it always helped for me having them written down rather than just kind of like thoughts in the back of my head, because the more I write down, the more likely I am to first of all remember it, and second of all stick to it. So that by no means I get to the end of every week and there's more than like 2 ticks on my page, but it definitely is a start knowing what I want to get out of every week.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I think I mentioned earlier, when you're playing sport, I find it quite easy to stay in the moment. You're focused. You've got your pre-shot routine. You play. I actually find it harder to do at work because in the kind of environment where you've got emails kind of popping up all the time, that you're never in the moment. It's that bit about trying to concentrate on one task, at the moment and get that done. Which sometimes when you do have that list that's quite long, that says I've got to get through all of those things, but actually it's better to focus on it, do it, and get past it and move on, to the next thing. And I suppose kind of that physically kind of ticking it off. Lesley, obviously in the workplace, and we've kind of mentioned a little bit before, we were all kind of individuals, but also all had to turn up as a team, and that's quite different because it changes your routine. If you're anything like me, I had a routine that I went through to prepare, and then you're suddenly in a team environment and you've got to do it differently because you've all maybe got to eat at the same time, you've all got to wear the same clothes, you've all got to go to that kind of thing. We all respond in different ways. Can you tell us a little bit about, both in the sporting sense and then in a work sense, about how you can build a good team and how important that is to performance?
I think even when you're competing in an individual sport, you're always part of, I'm going to call it a crew, because that makes sense in snow sport or board sports language. You've always got a crew, and your crew can be your team, hopefully is your team in the work sense, and you share experiences and you share values. and you talk about those and you represent them, and they become part of the culture and the cultural artifacts that you value as a group of people. And I think that's so important, because when you get into the struggle zone, when you get into the space where things are new or challenging or different, then it's important that you can rely on every single perspective of the crew, of all the different crew members, to shine the most light on the situation. And then you will be able to bring all of yourself to solve the problem. I don't believe that you can solve difficult problems on your own without collaborating with others, because no one person can see 360 degrees of the situation and understand that. So finding ways to collaborate with others and really lean on them to help you lean on yourself and find that bit of you that you're not quite able to access yet, but that might be the bit that solves the problem, and vice versa for the other people, is what gets you into the creative space, if you like. I think snowboarding, we're really lucky. We as a community value creativity and progression. So instantly we want to collaborate even with our fellow competitors. It seems so obvious and natural for us to do that. So even although in a competition environment where, of course, everyone's at a World Cup or Olympics as a competitor, so wants to come out on top. But at the same time, you want everybody else who you're competing against to do their best as well. So it's about raising your game and helping others to raise theirs at the same time. So yeah, I think, what does that look like if you go into a workspace? Talking about what's important and why it's important, and being brave to unpack that with each other. I think that's really the key to forming a good group or team.
Susan, just from your take, before I come to you, John, in terms of bonding, do you have to get on with everybody? Did you get on with everybody in all the teams that you were part of?
Like, absolutely not. And like, sport is the same as any other workplace, isn't it? Like, you're thrown together with these people that, like, normally you happen to get on with like most of them, but no, like, definitely for me, like, I didn't get on with everyone. And my coach, who I ended up getting the Olympics with, we like hated each other, and like that's like not an overstatement. And like, you would think that would be really kind of detrimental, but actually it was fine, because we really disliked each other personally, but we both, I think, respected each other, like, kind of on the badminton court, and like, I respected her as a coach, and she, I think, respected me as a player, and we were both going for like absolutely the same goal. So just because we didn't like each other particularly as people, and like didn't have much in common, and like we basically, as soon as we set foot outside the badminton hall, didn't have a word to say to each other, but we both just kind of came to an agreement that that was the best way to do it, and trying to be friends out with kind of like our work just wouldn't have worked, and would have, I think, impacted like things on the court. So we really just agreed that it was fine to dislike each other, but as long as we were both like really like fighting and going for the same goal and giving like everything to get that same goal, it doesn't matter if you're friends or not. When you've got like a very definite goal there to go for, it kind of makes it easy, or certainly like, I find it easier to put the other stuff aside, because we absolutely weren't there to be friends. We were there to achieve something, and achieve a very like certain specific thing, and like we managed it. So I think that shows that no, like, you don't need to be friends. And I think it's probably a bit like stupidly optimistic to think you would be friends and would like everyone when you all get thrown together. You've not necessarily chosen to be with these people. I think it would be like, I mean, you're lucky if you do like everyone and everyone likes you, but it's absolutely not necessary, I don't think.
But it's a bit of that, as you said, that's that mutual respect, and as Lesley mentioned, recognizing that everybody's got that part to play. You kind of combine, exactly, don't you? I suppose, John, looking at building a good team, are there any kind of identifiable characteristics or behaviors that, of good leaders or coaches or managers, again, looking from the sporting context, but taking it into the work environment of how do you get the best out of your team? I know in a work environment, I'm regarded as quite hard. I don't praise people enough. I expect everybody to give me their best, and that's kind of expected. So I know I've got to work quite hard on saying well done. But what are there kind of things that you could be encouraging people to do to get the best out of their co-workers as well as themselves?
Well, there's a whole research area on leadership styles, and I don't think anyone could say in any webinar here or elsewhere that there is a particular style that would be a recipe for success across the entire globe. We do know that there are different types of leaders. We talk about transactional leaders where they'll come to agreements and negotiations with people to do certain things and being rewarded for it. But most of the time, we're looking for transformational leaders who can create almost like an intrinsic desire for people to give of their best as a natural consequence of what they do. And transformational leaders have been studied, and people look at those behaviours and try to draw particular themes. Some of the things that they found is that the transformational leaders tend to set very good examples themselves by their behaviours or by their own performance. They tend to demonstrate the model behaviours and create the culture that everybody then can contribute to and become part of. I think they try to meet the players in sports situation or colleagues in a work situation, try to meet the players' needs and understand what it is that they need to allow them to flourish. And I think wherever possible, they like to involve the players or the work people within goal setting and targets. And fundamentally, a good leader will allow individual peoples to flourish and feel that they can do their best. So, you know, you talked about maybe praising people. I think most people kind of know when they've done a good job, and you'll get to a position where praise might be valuable and helpful, but individual athletes and workers will know when they've put in a really, really good shift, and it's the self-satisfaction that's a stronger motivator than a word of praise from anyone else in most cases.
I think, Lesley, when we were chatting kind of earlier, you kind of touched on that as well, thinking that about that kind of common purpose and you know, having more than just about the you know, the actual kind of event or, you know, job environment. It's that creating that environment, you need to actually sometimes have something higher that you're aiming for. Do you want to kind of chat about that?
Yeah, I think in my experience, it really helps if there's an agreement, and obviously you don't need to be best friends with the people in your team or your crew, but a shared trust, a shared respect, and a shared agreement on what is valuable, in the terms of what the purpose is of what it is you're doing, and what good will look like, what will a job well done, and what will that get you. And then I think that really helps people to find some intrinsic motivation, as Don was pointing out there, in terms of just really keeping motivated to do the job. What does that look like? I think it helps to represent the effort and the skills that have gone into the process, however that looks. In snowboarding, that's quite easy. We represent it in the form of pictures or clips of tricks, and that becomes a kind of currency or social capital that tells the story of the collaboration and the goods that are created through that collaboration. I think in any work environment, though, you can find what that looks like, the things that tell the story related to what's valuable. And that's really important. That's what people will talk about. That's what people will get excited about, or in snowboard language, stoked on.
Yeah, it is. It's that kind of, isn't it? It's that common, the shared values that you're all working towards, but also, I suppose, in terms of creating the environment that everybody's got that bit of autonomy, so that they can do what they, you know, in their own sphere. Would you agree? You know, kind of, Susan, it's in that bit. We talked about creating the environment from a sports point of view, but you've got to give people the environment themselves within the work environment, so that they feel they've got a bit of control, and that it's within, it's a bit like, isn't it, that kind of Goldilocks thing, that it's not too hot and not too cold, that you've got to be in the area that you can perform best.
Yeah, and you know, like everyone said, there's no like one kind of definite concrete, this is the way to do it for everyone. But yeah, I think like that's definitely, and this applies in sport and everything else, you know, if you have a bit of kind of independence and a bit of like personal responsibility, you're much more likely to take it, you know, rather than if every minute of your day is managed and you're being told exactly what to do every minute, it's easy to kind of be like, oh, no, I'm not doing it. Whereas if you're being left to do it yourself, and you know, you're being judged, you know, at the end of the week or the month or the end of the project or whatever, it'll catch up with you if you don't do it, rather than being told, every single kind of your hand held every single kind of step of the way. And definitely, like when I was an athlete, I definitely found that actually if I was left to it a little bit more, I actually put more in, because you feel like you're leading it more than you're just being like ordered about and being told what to do every second. And obviously there's a balance, because also there is like, you need like a bit of guidance and a bit of kind of pointing in the right direction, but there's definitely a balance of also, more often than not, if you leave people to it, they actually put more into it than if you're pushing them the whole way.
Yeah, I think, in the sporting environment, don't we call it being in the zone, in terms of that's there. I think in a work environment, it's kind of it's having the flow. I think it kind of more is sort of similar. And I know if I was in the zone from a competitive point of view, you tend to feel quite calm and in control and everything. I used to have a wee tune that was probably the tune of the week that was in my head. And every so often you can feel that at work, where it feels as if, everything is actually going, you get those days where everything is kind of going according to plan.
Days, no.
You mentioned, Lesley, motivation. I'm going to come to kind of John, because John, I don't know if you remember, one of the things that we did speak about was I was struggling with motivation at a time where I was okay in the big competitions, but was then finding it harder to motivate myself in the smaller competitions. So I could do the top ones, but not, I was kind of, I call chasing that high, that adrenaline that you get, that I wasn't then getting if I was just teeing up in the monthly medal, compared to, and the same could be said for tasks at work, with that element of kind of repetition. So what are your suggestions for keeping people motivated?
It's an interesting question that you raised, because I've faced it many times in my career advising sports people and sports teams. And each individual match, whether it be a team or an individual sport, will have different levels of challenge. Let me give you one example from work that I did some years ago. I used to work with the SFA refereeing programme. Now, many people on this call will not maybe believe that referees in football are under stress and pressure, but I can promise you that when you're refereeing and officiating at Champions League games or Europa League finals or World Cups or European Championships, you're absolutely under the microscope. And even though you're not performing in the same way as the players are, you are delivering a service. The parallels are obvious. And Scottish FA, they used to have this mission where their top referees that we might do Champions League also had to service the whole senior Scottish game. So it would be quite possible for somebody to do a Champions League game on a Wednesday night and then have to go to Arbroath on the Saturday. Now, I mention Arbroath because they happen to do quite well, and I was trying very hard to find a team that was maybe lower than Champions League level, but on a good moment at this moment in time. And you can imagine how some referees might then go from Champions League and full television exposure to perhaps a second or a third or even a fourth tier game and have the difficulty. What we used to talk about was looking at the value that a smaller fixture had in terms of potential. And we also used to talk about the commitment to the stakeholders and those involved. So let's imagine we were talking to a referee who had to go and referee a fourth tier game that had maybe 1,000 people at it. And some of the players might be part-time. We used to talk about the importance it would be for the spectators and the players to be able to go home and say, today I was refereed by a Champions League referee that was on the television on Wednesday that you maybe saw. We also talked about trying to use a lower level event as an opportunity to refine and develop skills. So you might think that there are few skills involved in refereeing, but I can promise you, like all sports settings, there are hugely important things that are in small levels of detail. And you would never ask anybody to change something or do something new in the middle of a Champions League fixture. But what you might do is you might allow them to modify or update their skill set at a lower level event. So we used to try and find ways in which we could see the lower level event of having value and purpose to create a different type of motivation than just what the game actually meant. So it probably comes back to what Lesley was talking about, what Susan talked about trying to find ways to improve what you do every single day. And these lower level events actually became very important because it allowed you a platform to develop skills that you could then increase your confidence with, so that when it came to a higher level event, the step would be smaller and you'd have a learned habit that you can rely on.
Lesley, is that something that you would relate to? Did you, use the kind of smaller events, to as part of the kind of learning process to be able to deliver in the big events?
Absolutely, as a competitor, I'd say 100%. And then, now as an aging athlete, I'm going to say, I think there's a relevance there. I can still put my snowboard on and go and learn something by sticking to the piece. I don't go anywhere near a half pipe unless it's absolutely perfect and it's once in a year experience these days, if I'm lucky. But I can still learn a lot about myself from snowboarding if I really use acceptance to notice where I'm at, what's going on with me, maybe not so much physically or skillfully, but where my mental state's at, where my, for want of a better word, spiritual state is at. How does that all link together? What does that mean? How does that come out in my skill set? How can I use the capacities that I've got as a person to learn more and become more self-aware? And how do I then take that into the mundane tasks that are a part of every job, and that they just have to get done? So how does that inform who I am and why I am as I am, that might help me when I go on to do something more challenging? I actually find that having some sort of practice, a daily practice, really helps in this space. And whether that's yoga or breath work or mindfulness or art, something creative, just for 15 to 20 minutes, a wee bit longer if you have that time a day, helps me to orientate myself to myself, so that I then find value in the mundane tasks that will carry through into the things that are more interesting and challenging.
Susan, what about you? Do you find that you've now, with away from the kind of sporting arena, with new challenges that keep you as enthused and as excited as you were from that kind of competitive buzz?
Yeah, well, that's and I think so many athletes say this, there's nothing like it being a professional athlete, and then you give it up and you're a bit like, oh, what now? And it's really, really difficult to replace that feeling and replace, doing something that basically is your hobby, turns into your job and turns into your entire life. So it's really hard to replace it. And I think, I think what you're saying there about motivation, I think one thing about elite sport is people look at it, and they see the kind of glitz and glamour, like the Olympics or all that kind of thing, and think it looks amazing. And obviously it is, but so much of elite sport behind the scenes is so boring and so mind numbing, and there's nothing fancy at all about it. And I think that's when, for me anyway, the motivation was really hard, was when you're in this wee dingy gym by yourself, rehabbing from an injury and doing the most boring exercises you could ever think of for the next half hour. And that's, I think, what I've tried to bring into my normal life now, is that not all of it by any stretch is enjoyable, but you need to do the kind of rubbishy bits to get to the good bits. And if you and certainly when I was younger as an athlete, I so often kind of just went through the motions and was like, oh well, I've got to do this, I'll do it, but I'll do it at 40% and I'll get nothing out of it. And it took me quite long to realize that, well, if I'm going to have to spend the next 45 minutes doing something, I can either waste everyone's time and get nothing out of it, or I can try and get something out of it. If I'm going to have to do it, I might as well try and do it properly, or try and get something out of it. And I definitely feel like that now, because then sport at least was something I'd chosen to do. Work is you're often getting given things that you don't want to do, and so if you're going to have to do it, you might as well try and get something productive out of it. And I definitely feel like now that I try and get something useful out of whatever I do, even if I hate it or it's so boring, you can always get something. And even if you feel like it's too easy for you or beneath you, exactly what John was saying, that it might not necessarily be the stage that you think you want to be on, but that doesn't mean you can't use it for something, because it's the same as anything. You can't expect to go onto the biggest stage and do something for the first time and do it well. But if you practiced it a million times before that, then by the time you get to the biggest stage, it should be almost automatic, and you should be able to do it so much easier. So that's definitely something now in my kind of normal life I try and, you know, remember that even if it's so boring, you still can get something useful out of it.
Yeah, it's a bit about living the grind, isn't it? You know, I liked, you kind of, John, you know, you putting it in that kind of bigger picture of, you know, seeing all the small parts that lead to the bigger bit at the end. It's all just a kind of step on the journey. And I suppose part of it, John, is about living the journey as much as the destination.
It is, and I'm sure I'll come on to that as we go through. I just thought I'd make comment on one of the things that you said, where you used to enjoy the thrill of big competitions, but weren't really motivated by the monthly medal. I'm sure there are many people on this call that will resonate with that view. My solution there would be, wherever possible, you've got to try and find a joy in the activity rather than the consequence of it. So I know it's fantastic to have success and great results and so on in your sport, and you've obviously had a fantastic career in which that's happened. But the monthly medal still gives you an opportunity to visualize, flight, bounce and roll and strike the ball and create the picture in your mind and make it come to life. And even though you might not necessarily play at the highest level forever, and some people might never do that, you still have an opportunity to create a mental picture of what a shot should look like, put all your resources into that, and then make the real picture and the imagined picture coincide perfectly in a way that is one of the greatest feelings ever. And the monthly medal will still give you an opportunity to do that.
Well, and we've got a golf question that's come in, you know, and as a highly accomplished golfer, John, you know, what psychology do you bring to a match play tie? Here's the kind of classic question: do you play the course or do you play the opponent?
If I was being honest, I would focus on the performance, because it's about the performance that you deliver that gives you the best chance. So this will be a golf specific answer, so it's possible that not everybody will maybe get this particular level of detail. But in golf, you obviously have to put performance together, ball and target and so on to win a match. The only difference between match play and stroke play is that sometimes in match play, you might have to consider more what your opponent's doing when you then make your shot selection and execution. But for me, you always try to perform and let the result take care of itself. And there'll be times where you're playing a very, very strong opponent and you can play your very, very best game. You still might not win. And you've got to live with the fact that your job is to do your best and let the result fall.
And I think that's probably a kind of a quite neat way of bringing this kind of closer to the end. It is about, isn't it? It's you do your job, you look after your job, do your bit to the best of your ability, and success kind of will follow. I'm kind of conscious of the time. It's been fascinating. I've got lots of things that I've written down that I'm going to kind of take away. And I suppose that's what I do. I love reading, you know, and hearing about ways that you can improve your performance, whether that's golf, you know, whether that's, you know, kind of in the office. You always think that the next piece of advice you get is going to be the bit that, you know, unlocks it. It's going to be the secret. So I thought I might finish by asking each of you if there's something, if it's a book or a film or a quote that you turn to kind of each time, or you would recommend that people listening, you know, kind of listen, that they might get some nuggets from that will help them either in a sporting environment or in the working environment to improve their kind of performance. So Susan, is there something that you go to?
Yeah, a book I really like is by Michael Johnson, the 400 meter runner called Slaying the Dragon. It's quite an old book, but I think like what I really like about it, and he's been obviously like an amazing athlete and a better athlete than I ever was, you know, however many Olympic gold medals. But I think what really came through in that book, and I've read it a few times, is, you know, like how many like failures and how many kind of obstacles there are. Because I think, you know, especially when you look at athletes, you know, who've kind of like, you know, been at the top, been at like whatever level at the Olympics or whatever, it looks like, oh, well, you know, they're just, everything's gone really smoothly and it's been this kind of like great path to get to the very top. And like, that's so wrong. And if that, you know, even someone like Michael Johnson, who's won so much, it just shows like how hard the struggle can be often. And, you know, that a lot of the time is what can separate people who make it and people who don't make it, is that, you know, they get like knocked down and they keep going, you know, trying to like overcome it. And eventually you will. But I think like often, and like definitely I felt like this at times during my career of, you know, you get like a knock or you get a blow and you think like I can't do it anymore. I can't keep fighting it and can't keep like trying to overcome it. But you know, he kind of shows that someone like him has had like massive obstacles to overcome and managed it. But it just takes, you know, it takes like a lot of perseverance and a lot of determination. And you know, that applies to very much to sport, or it applies to anything. That actually, like most people have a lot more failures than they do successes. But it's when you only see the successes, it's easy to kind of forget that those people have had a million failures up to that point.
Yeah, it's the resilience, isn't it? Lesley, what about you?
I've got a book and a podcast. The book's called The Art of Impossible, and it's by Stephen Kotler. He's written a number of other books that are also really interesting. He's got a background in adventure sports or action sports, extreme, whatever you want to call them, those sports. And that's worth a read. And the podcast is called Looking Sideways Podcast. And it's an action sports and other related endeavors podcast, and interviews people who work, performers, athletes, industry people, pioneers in the action sports and related scenes. So yeah, those are my recommendations.
Perfect. And John?
Well, you did ask me a golf question, and I'm fairly sure that most of the audience here today will have heard about Bob Rotella's book In Golf about not being a game of perfect. And what I particularly like about that book is that it talks about acceptance and understanding that a perfect result sometimes isn't achievable. And it's not about being perfect, it's necessarily about being your best. I also think that at times, just for a last piece of advice, it's really important to have a long-term goal. And sometimes the goal might take years or even decades to arrive at. But even though you've got the goal in your mind, please do not forget about the journey on the way to that goal, because the majority of your life will be in that journey before maybe the goal's achieved. And it's important that you remember to live for the moment in the journey rather than wait until you might get to that end point. And the last thing would be for the golfers in the group. We all play at different levels and the game has something for everyone. But the phrase that I always like to try and promote with my athletes is to try to make your mentality become the reality. So create the picture and do everything you can to make that picture come to life and enjoy trying.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I mean, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. There's so much in there that people, you know, I hope will take away and use in day-to-day life as well as kind of sport. To everyone's listening, I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and that it inspires you to go forward to be your best. I have a quote up in my golf room, you know, kind of at home, which you can maybe pick up. That everything that you need is already inside you, and that's something that I remind myself of. So finally, our next sports related webinar is going to be at 11 o'clock on the 19th of May. We're going to welcome special guest Donna Fraser, OBE, who's Head of Inclusion and Engagement at this year's Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, and Mark Williams, who's Chief Operating Officer at the Dennis Law Trust Street Sport. And Donna and Mark are going to be discussing how the Games will strive to bring people together from across the Commonwealth, regardless of cultural background, disability, gender, socioeconomic background, and what other organisations and work environments can learn from this approach. You can register to join that webinar through our website in the same way as you've joined this one, and I do hope you can join us. Thank you again to our three panellists, and thank you to everybody for joining us, and goodbye.